One of the most important laws of physics is gravity. It holds us to the Earth, and without it, we would be swept away into outer space. But what if one day this law suddenly disappeared? How would it affect our planet and its inhabitants? You'll find out in this video. But first, like this video and subscribe so that you won't miss any new videos. What if one day you were going about your daily business, walking down the street, drinking coffee, when all of a sudden everything around you just stopped? Cars froze in mid-traffic, birds in the sky, even your coffee froze in mid-air. All because the force of gravity suddenly disappeared for some unknown reason. Of course, at first you wouldn't notice anything wrong. After all, you'd be affected by the lack of gravity along with everything else. So you might be thinking, who cares if gravity disappears? I won't even feel it. However, that's only partly true. The thing is, you'd still feel the force of gravity, but it would be directed upward instead of downward. That's because everything around you, including the Earth itself, would continue to be pulled towards the center of the Earth, which used to be the center of the planet before gravity disappeared. As a result, you would feel an extremely strong repulsive force equal in magnitude to the force of gravity, but directed upwards, and that force would be roughly 9.8 meters per second squared. You might think that after a while you could get used to this reversed pull of the Earth and start moving freely in the air. However, unfortunately, you're too heavy for that. In fact, nothing alive could make it into the air. After all, each body strives to be in a weightless state, that is, to move freely in space. However, a body can do this only if its weight is negligible compared to the mass of the planet or other large celestial body. Otherwise, the body will simply fall to the ground. A good example is the astronauts aboard the International Space Station. Their weight is so insignificant compared to the Earth that they seem to be weightless. But if the ISS fell to Earth, the astronauts would immediately be crushed to a pancake like you and I. And now imagine a much more massive object, a neutron star. Its mass is comparable to the mass of the Sun, but its radius is only a few kilometers. Therefore, the gravity on the surface of a neutron star is thousands, millions times stronger than the Earth's gravity, and a human being would be absolutely unable to withstand such a force. To put it simply, if you ever wondered what it would feel like to be squeezed like toothpaste from a tube, try stepping foot on a neutron star. But let's go back to our Earth, which suddenly lost its gravity. Remember, the main thing that would happen to you is that you would be pushed upwards with a force equal to the force of gravity. However, over time, this force would weaken significantly. The thing is, the Earth would gradually begin to collapse under the influence of its own gravity, and it would lose its spherical shape, turning into a much denser and smaller object. This process would take only a few hours, during which the Earth would shrink to about 27,000 kilometers in diameter. For comparison, the current diameter of our planet is almost 13,000 kilometers. However, even at this stage, you still wouldn't be able to leave the planet's surface. The thing is, when the Earth shrinks, its rotational speed increases significantly, and centrifugal force arises, which counteracts the force of gravity. In other words, the Earth would literally throw you off its surface. So until the Earth shrinks to 6,000 kilometers in diameter, you'll have no chance of getting into outer space. Only then will the centrifugal force weaken so much that the gravitational pull of the Earth will no longer be able to hold you back. By that time, your planet will already look more like a huge ball than a sphere. At this stage, you'll finally be able to leave the Earth, but you'll have to spend quite a lot of energy on that. The thing is, in addition to increasing its rotational speed, the Earth will also increase its temperature many times over. That's because when the planet shrinks, the internal energy of its core increases, which is released in the form of heat. By the way, this process will completely destroy the ozone layer, which will lead to the fact that all living things on Earth will die very quickly from radiation sickness. Fortunately, you're not subject to such trifles, and you'll probably manage to leave the dying planet and fly into outer space. But what next? The thing is, without gravity, you can forget about the possibility of returning home. The fact is that without gravity, your trajectory will be straight, and since there are no other planets nearby, there's simply nowhere to go. In other words, you're doomed to wander around the universe for eternity. But fortunately, there's a way to fix this situation. If you manage to reach the sun, which is about 150 million kilometers away, you will be able to feel a strong enough gravitational pull to change your trajectory and eventually return to Earth. But don't rejoice too early. First, you'll have to deal with meteor showers in orbit around the sun at various distances from it. There are millions, billions of meteoroids ranging from fractions of a millimeter to several meters in size. And sooner or later, one of these space rocks will crash into you. Even if you manage to dodge all the meteorites, you'll face another danger. It's the solar wind. Even at a distance of 150 million kilometers from the sun, its influence is very strong and dangerous. Charged particles of the solar wind will destroy all your equipment and slowly kill you yourself. And if you somehow manage to get past all these obstacles, the sun will be waiting for you with open arms. However, the journey to it will take several years, and you'll definitely run out of fuel long before you reach your destination. Now, if you're one of those people who think that in the absence of gravity, everyone will fly away into outer space, well, I'll disappoint you. Without gravity, our planet would turn into a giant water balloon and simply burst. But what if the force of gravity didn't disappear but got much weaker? The first thing you'd notice is that it'd become much easier to move around. Walking up the stairs, running, jumping, doing exercises, all that would become much easier. Sports records would be broken in all disciplines that require physical effort. Moreover, it would become much easier to lift and carry heavy objects. So robbery and transportation of valuable metals would become much easier. After a while, you'd also notice that cars would start driving much faster. After all, they'd experience less resistance from the atmosphere. Planes would rise into the sky much faster and could stay in the air indefinitely without additional fuel. In general, any kind of transport would become much more efficient. A day after this strange event, you'd wake up and see a pale sky through your window. The thing is, with the weakening of gravity, the moon would be a little further away from the Earth, and without the gravitational pull of our planet, it would drift even further into space. It would no longer be able to rotate on its axis and would present only one dead hemisphere to us. In addition, it would stop reflecting the sun's rays and would become invisible to us, and the stars in the night sky would no longer twinkle. They'd simply hang motionless in the night sky. But the most interesting thing would be to see how animals react to the weakening of gravity. We think that it is thanks to the force of gravity that animals are able to move around normally on the surface of the Earth. How will they behave in conditions of zero gravity? Birds will be the happiest about this event. From now on, they'll be able to soar in the sky without flapping their wings, spending only a minimum amount of energy. In general, every person who has ever dreamed of learning how to fly will be happy. All kinds of balls will become heavier and harder to roll. Playing sports with them will become more difficult. It will be almost impossible to play tennis. As for cats, they'll turn into real superheroes. Have you ever seen how a cat falls from a height? They always land on their feet, but how do they do it? Thanks to their excellent sense of balance and muscles that allow them to twist in the air. But in the absence of gravity, cats will be simply invincible. They'll be able to move around in the air at incredible speeds and heights, performing feats that are simply impossible on a regular basis. By the way, humans will have the same opportunity though. People will have to train hard for this, but why bother when you can just be born a cat? In general, with the weakening of gravity, life on Earth would be much more fun, but it would be short. The thing is, the moon plays an important role in stabilizing the climate of our planet. Without the gravitational pull of the moon, the oceans would rise 20 centimeters higher and most coastal cities would be flooded. Moreover, due to the instability of the climate, there would often be hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes, and so on. In short, it would become deadly to live on Earth, so maybe it's better not to mess with the laws of physics. But what if you could adjust them to your liking? That's what the protagonist of the film Everything Everywhere All at Once was doing. His job was to visit parallel universes and borrow superpowers from other versions of himself. Watch our video about this film and find out how many of its scenes are based on real scientific facts.